Hello, I'm Chris Balmer with the Victoria chapter of the Canadian Company of Pilgrims. This summer I had the opportunity of interviewing Jordon Ozero, who first walked the Camino Francais in winter 2013. Now, all of our pilgrim interviews are unique, but this one is special in a different way. We have all been very familiar with the saying, "The Camino provides." Well, in this interview, Jordon will explore how walking the Camino is an opportunity and springboard for meaningful personal change and transformation. At the end of the interview, Jordon will come on and explain the purpose and process of his research project and invite you to be a part of it. So I hope you enjoy this interview. Hello everyone, I'm Chris Balmer. I'm with the Canadian Company of Pilgrims Victoria chapter, and we're sitting in the lovely back garden of Dennis and Jim in Victoria. And I'm sitting with Jordon Ozero, who has walked the Camino a number of times, 2 times in the winter. And his experiences have actually propelled him to write a thesis on pilgrims' transformative experiences on the way.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here and speaking with you. And as a fairly long time member of the CCOP, it's a real treat to give back for a change.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's start. So, how did you first become attracted to walking the Camino? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, my life at that time was complicated. I'd spent 10 years working on cruise ships, and if you've ever been on a ship, you'll know that you're surrounded by thousands of people on a fairly small ship by outside standards, and you're working 4 to 6 months every day for many hours a day, and that stress and anxiety builds up over a period of time, and that's where I found myself about to burn out. And I guess it was the Camino providing. I was stumbling into a movie called The Way, if you've heard of it. A nice story about personal transformation, and that really started the whole process. It planted a seed in me. I read Hape Kerkelin's book, I'm Off Then, shortly after that. And within a year and a half of training and getting ready and lining up vacation time, I found myself in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in January of 2013.
Wow. That's quite a change from your background. Wonderful. So let's start with on that first Camino in 2013 in January. What were some of your expectations going in, and how did those match with your actual experiences that first time?
Yeah, great question, because my background at that time for the Camino was the movie The Way. A German comedian's book about the way, and John Brierley's guidebook. So I took little excerpts out of each one of those that seemed important and sort of built in my mind what was going to happen. And like most first-time pilgrims, I packed everything you could think of because I knew I was going to be walking over the Pyrenees in January, and the way taught me that people die on the Pyrenees. So I came loaded for every possible contingency. So I started off with a 36-pound backpack, and that was my second mistake. The first mistake was trying to put a poncho on in the wind. But I got out there with really a simple background. It wasn't overly researched. And I think that's a big difference with today. So I think a lot of people get that background in a much more complete way. I went a little bit blind, and I went with 2 ideas of spiritual and non-spiritual. Brierley does a good job of explaining to people that there's 2 sides to a Camino, and I thought that seemed relevant. But I did also notice that watching The Way and reading Kerkelin's book, they were both very secular in their approach. And that was my starting point. As I worked my way across Spain, I found something different. Being a winter pilgrim, you have a very different reality. We'll get probably more into that a little later, but the stark reality was there wasn't a lot of people. The country itself was very quiet in the winter. So a lot of the things I'd seen or read just weren't in line with what I experienced.
Jordon, you're writing your thesis on pilgrims' transformative experiences on the Camino. Can you just give us a little bit of an overview of that?
Sure can. So the working title is El Camino de Santiago, Catalysts for Transformative Tourism in the Secular Space.
Wow.
So what I'm really researching is from a secular point of view, how has the Camino provided catalysts that facilitate or encourage personal transformations? A lot of authors have written about religious transformation, but there's a growing phenomena of secular transformation along a religious pilgrimage route, and that's what I'm looking into.
Okay, well that really fits with the quotes that really struck me in reading some of your preliminary research. And I'm just going to highlight one. You've already spoken to this one. The definition of a pilgrimage is undertaking a journey that is redolent with meaning. That really resonates with what you've just said. And another one suggesting that the modern day secular pilgrims are searching for, and indeed expecting, moments when they experience something out of the ordinary that mark a transition between the mundane and the humdrum world of everyday existence to a special and sacred state. Can you say a little bit more about that piece?
Sure. So the first one, talking about redolent with meaning, really speaks to the evolving nature of pilgrimage. So historically, religiously, this is a sacred journey to a religious place. We use the term a lot differently today, where it's expanded to mean things that are meaningful, but not necessarily within the religious connotation. So one can say a pilgrimage to Elvis's Graceland, or financiers may talk about a pilgrimage to Wall Street. So pilgrims and pilgrimage, really the term is expanded a lot. And as far as people looking for and expecting dramatic change, this isn't particularly new. It's just becoming more prevalent on the Camino. So often people have taken journeys. People have hiked through the Himalayas looking for some sense of spirituality. People have gone on yoga retreats looking for inner peace. So this is not a necessarily new concept, but we're seeing it in great numbers now in the Camino, where over a 20 to 25 year period, we've seen people declaring their motivation as secular going from 15, 20%, as high as 60% in recent years. So there's been a real dramatic shift on the Camino, and that's really the phenomenon that's interested me.
That is really a dramatic shift, for sure. You also mentioned certain conditions or catalysts that on the Camino that contribute to the pilgrims' experiences. Can you elaborate a little on that, and can you mention some of the catalysts that were in place for you there?
Sure. I won't speak too much out of my own experience. And we'll talk about why a little bit later. But for me, I certainly, in hindsight, recognize certain things that played an important role in my own transformations. Probably the biggest one is a term we say, communitas, where a group of people will come together. There's a stripping away of social status and sort of a group goal that brings people together. And you don't see it exclusively on the Camino. Long distance trails like the Appalachian Trail, for example, have a great sense of communitas as well. So that was certainly one aspect. Another one was the physicality of the Camino. Getting up every day, walking for, in the winter months, 20 to 25 kilometers often, because you needed to find somewhere to sleep. And that goal setting every day of managing to walk 25 kilometers and achieving that goal, that was quite an important part for me, as it turned out. The connection with the heritage and the history. knowing that even pre-Christian era, people had walked this route for thousands of years, following the Milky Way. So that was an important part that came together. So I have more, but those are certainly highlights that I look back and I can see how they facilitated what I was to go through.
That's really fascinating, actually. What about social connections? I understand that social connections and bringing new perspectives into people's awareness can be a big key influence for people. I'm curious, on that first Camino in the winter in January 2013, how was that experience for you in terms of meeting and appreciating people along the way?
If you've never walked in the winter, it's hard to imagine. A lot of the CCOP members walk between May and October, and they're greeted by thousands of other people per day. I probably met 12 people in total for my entire Camino, the first one in January 2013. It was not uncommon to go for 3, 4, 5 days without seeing another human. I would arrive at a municipal albergue. There'd be a sign on the door that said, get the key from the bar next door and leave some money in the box. And that was a common experience. So those 12 people are still very important to me today, because we 12, we formed a very good Camino family through that communitas. And although we didn't see each other every day, we still managed to walk our own speeds and have our own experience. I can remember one example coming into Hess just the day before Burgos, and I hadn't seen anyone for 4 or 5 days. And I came into the first little albergue that was open in Hess and opened the door, and everyone I knew was there. And there was hugs, there was cheer, there was dinners together, people laughing all night because the whole gang had come back together. And I'm not suggesting you can't have a similar experience other times of the year, but it was especially profound, that experience in the winter.
It seemed like it would be a lot deeper in a sense, or could be a lot deeper, because you're meeting such fewer people. You would sort of look forward to it and really get quite a bit more out of it, the experience.
Well, you're certainly receptive when you do find a person. And some of the people I met, we spoke different languages, and we still managed to have a very enjoyable night together, trying to figure out how to communicate.
Right.
But the desire was very strong to communicate. So in every instance, it was a fun night.
Nice. Let's talk momentarily about the personal transformation aspect on the Camino. Realizing everybody's experiences are unique, are there some common stages, or is there a common kind of movement to the process of transformation as you experience it or as you've researched it so far?
Sure. You know, from an academic side or a clinical side, there's certain steps that are defined, and I suppose there's some steps that we think of in Camino terms too. In Camino terms, we hear about the 3 stages of a Camino: the physical, the emotional, the spiritual. I've heard that bandied around for years, and I don't know how it's founded or where it was founded, but it's a common term, and people subscribe to that. Academically, we look at a defined intent where we have our normal life, and we step outside of that life with intent to produce a meaningful change. And we go through steps and processes within that sacred element of time, and then we take our new self and figure out how to reintegrate it back into our mundane or our humdrum life. So there is a very strong correlation to other things. People that have struggled with addiction will often take themselves out of that life, go to a center where they can be helped, walk through the stages and processes, and reintegrate back into life. So I think what we do as far as transformation is maybe intuitive, We go seeking something in many cases, and we don't know what the steps or the processes are, but it seems that there are catalysts there that help us navigate these steps and processes. And there's very few people that I've talked to or read about that haven't undergone some transformation, with intent or without. Very few people, it seems, come back exactly the same person they were before they left.
Mm-hmm. Well, that really sort of highlights a question I've been pondering too about this. When I walked the Camino, I noticed that pilgrims rarely talked about their backgrounds or their careers or what they did for work, but very, very quickly, people started sharing really personal information, sometimes intensely personal information, with complete strangers. Is that something that you think is part of the openness that leads to transition, that sort of just that the Camino provides sort of a forum for, that's safe, and there's vulnerability, but there's mutual trust? Is that something unique to the Camino, do you think?
I'm not sure that it's unique to the Camino. And again, I speak of the Appalachian Trail or the Great Canadian Trail or any number of long distance trails where a great number of people are transiting through, but the Camino certainly has it. I believe there's, the idea of communitas we spoke about, but there's also a relative anonymity that makes it much easier to open yourself. Most of the people you meet there, you haven't known before, and you won't know again. And you're going through something intensely personal, and you can share that personally with them without the thought or the repercussion of, but how do I face them tomorrow? Right. In the winter we were fewer. In the spring and summer, when you're amongst thousands, it's conceivable you won't see that person again, even during the Camino. So I think when you remove the social status, when you remove the pressure of future relationships, and you have a combined goal, it makes it much easier to be open, to receive feedback, to give feedback, and to really examine the underlying reasons why you're looking for transformation.
This has been so interesting. As we draw it to a close, I can really see how you've been attracted to that whole transformative process. It's really fascinating for secular pilgrims, and this has become a phenomenon that you're wanting to do research on. So is there time for you to talk a little bit about giving us an overview, or give us a little bit of an overview of your how your research is progressing, or what you're going to be looking to do in your research, and how we might even be helpful as pilgrims in the CCOP?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I would love to continue working with the CCOP because the membership itself that I've been a part of for a number of years now really works well for what I'm looking at. Within my research design, I'm looking at 3 different methods of gathering data in several different stages. So I'm going to be looking to work with a group of 6 to 10 experienced pilgrims who said, I went with secular intention. And maybe it's important we step back at that point too and say, what exactly does that mean? Because we can use the word secular, but in the definition I'm using, anything not religious, so not based on a religion or answerable to a religion, is secular. So you can have a spiritual desire or a spiritual intent that's not tied to religious intent, and that would still fall within my research. So that's really what I'm going to look for, is having an opportunity to work with people who said to themselves, or can say now, that I did go with spiritual or simply a secular intention, and I certainly recognize something happened during my trip, and I would say I have transformed. So I want to start with a group interview, because the benefits of that are we can have the discussion, we can encourage each other and create an environment of collective remembering. When you speak to one person one time, you might not remember all the things that happened to you, but as a group, we can tease that out, and we can start talking and remembering more and more things that happened during the Camino. So that's how I want to begin my data collection. Then I want to get into some deeper interviews, so working one-on-one with people and really asking the question, you had a transformative experience. Tell me everything you can remember about it, and then we'll chase it, because everyone's experience is going to be so vastly different. And we'll just chase it and talk about why and what and how, and really explore how that transformation came to be. A third phase is called digital ethnography, where I'm going to spend a month and scour social media, go through blogs and vlogs and YouTube videos, and look for people that have documented their own personal transformation and gather that data, which then leads to the fourth phase, which is another group interview. And that group interview it's not even so much an interview, but called a focus group then, where we're going to try and interpret what all this data means. So I'll bring in a lot of data, and as a group we can look at it and say, well, we see a strong trend of younger people are saying this, and a different demographic is saying this. What does it all mean? And that really will wrap up the data collection, the primary data. So it's a real varied approach to data collection, but I think it has the opportunity to bear some real fruit. And what I'm going to hope for is that we can really find people from coast to coast within the CCOP that are interested in doing this. And I really do encourage coast to coast, because I want to know in the Atlantic provinces versus the Ontario-Quebec region versus the middle of the country versus the West Coast. I want to see the differences. I want to hear the experiences, because I suspect they could be very different. So that is, the call to action I'm putting out, and hoping to hear back from the CCOP that there are people out there that would like to be part of this research and share some of their valuable time and their more valuable experiences.
Wonderful. Well, Jordon, that was really, really fascinating and very, very valuable, what you have shared this afternoon with us, this evening with us. And I am sure there are pilgrims within our organization that can make a real contribution, and a fascinating discussion of phases of your research that are going to bring it all together. And I think it really cements the whole uniqueness of what we often share with each other individually. I mean, I would love to see people involved in your project. So once again, Jordon Ozero, thank you so much for being here. There will be a question and answer period after our conversation, and we'll make sure to put the contact information for how people get in touch with you and when online in the appropriate way when we have that information. So once again, thank you so much. It's been marvelous. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. I've had a great time, and so excited to be part of something with the CCOP. Important group for me. Well, here we are. Thanks for sticking with us, and I'm hopeful, if you're still watching at this point, that you may be interested in being a participant in this research. So quickly again, to clarify, the purpose of the research is to understand what catalysts exist on the Camino or are associated with the Camino that are providing transformative experiences for people who have secular motivations for walking the Camino. So if we look at a few of the key terms again, just to recap, catalyst, secular, transformation. If we look at each one of these and make sure we understand them, a catalyst is really just any agent that provokes or speeds significant change or action. So what can be catalysts along the Camino? Well, everything can be a catalyst, but what was a catalyst for you? Some examples that I've seen before are the people that you meet either before, during, or after the Camino, the physical elements that you experienced, walking over the Pyrenees, the Meseta. Did you walk in the spring, summer, fall, or winter? How far did you walk? These are all important catalysts that most people will experience during their Camino time. Secular, well, that really denotes any attitudes, activities, or other things that have no basis in religion. So why is this important for my research? Well, over the last 20 or 30 years, we've seen a great uptick in people motivated for secular reasons to walk the Camino trails. So I'm looking at this group of people, but I'm still learning that they have many transformative experiences. So what is happening with the secularly motivated people to have such transformative experiences along a religious pilgrimage trail? The next thing is transformation. And here we really want to look at things that change the character or condition of a person. And do they need to be life-altering? Absolutely not. Every transformation is important, and each one has its own place. In my research, all are equal because your experience was your experience, and the catalyst that provided that experience is really the underlying reason for the research. Some examples that I've seen: people dealing with loss of a loved one, looking for a new direction after they've lost his job, using it to gain confidence. Maybe this was the first time they walked through a country without knowing a language, or maybe it was even the first time traveling abroad alone. Any of these things could be a significant catalyst for transformation. So the criteria that I'm looking for: 15 to 20 people to have interviews with, and really some very easy criteria. First, you must have walked the Camino at least one time. Your motivation needs to be secular, so not a religious calling to walk the Camino. You must have experienced some form of transformative event along the Camino. And again, these don't need to be life-altering. Your transformation is important to the research. And finally, you just need to be willing to be virtually interviewed and recorded prior to the end of 2022 is what I'm shooting for. There may be opportunity for early 2023, but I'd really prefer to have all the interviews done before the end of the year. So if this is you, if you have that Camino experience, if you had some sort of transformative event along the Camino or after the Camino because of the Camino, I'd love to have you take part in the research. My email is jordon.ozero, that's JORDON.Ozero, OZERO, @gmail.com. And I really would look forward to hearing from you, and so we can set some time up. Thank you very much.